Hi guys, welcome back. We are reading a new story. This is Atalanta, the Fleet-Footed Huntress. I'm really excited about this one. There are really good class discussions to have about this story, so we are going to get right into it. This story has 3 parts, just like Theseus had 5. I'm just going to read the whole thing today, so it might be a little bit of a longer video, but you'll have the whole story in one video. So I thought that was better for us this time. So we'll see how it goes. So part 1 is the bear on the mountain. And I will say that I want you to focus on the pronouns. We talked about pronouns before in class. The pronouns that this story uses for its characters in part 1. Do they say he and she and him and her? Where do they say it? And why does the word it matter? Okay, it doesn't make any sense right now, but we're going to read it, and I think you'll get where I'm going, but I want to point that out beforehand. I want you to listen for when I say it. What am I referring to? Why is that important? So let's get into this. The bear on the mountain. In a sunny land in Greece called Arcadia, there lived a king and a queen who had no children. They wanted very much to have a son who might live to rule over Arcadia when the king was dead. After after many years, a child was born to them, but it was a girl. "What is a girl good for?" raged the king. "She can never do anything but sing and spin. If the child had been a boy, oh, he might have learned to do many things, to ride, to hunt, to fight in wars, and by he would rule as king of Arcadia. But this girl can never be a king." Then, in his wild rage, he called to one of his men and bade him take the babe out to a mountain where there was nothing but rocks and thick woods and leave it there. The man carried the child far up the mountainside and laid it down on a bed of moss in the shadow of a great rock. The child stretched out its baby hands toward him and smiled, but he turned away and left it there, for he did not dare to disobey the king. For a whole night and a whole day the babe lay on its bed of moss, waiting for its mother, but only the birds among the trees heard its pitiful cries. At last it grew so weak for want of food that it could only moan and move its head a little from side to side. Just before dark on the second evening, a she-bear, a mother bear, came strolling down the mountainside from her den. She was looking for her cubs, for some hunters had stolen them that very day while she was away from home, and they were nowhere to be found. As the stars came out, the mother bear heard the babe's moans and saw it lying helpless on its bed of moss. She looked at it kindly, licked its face with her warm tongue, and then lay down beside it, just as she would have done with her own little cubs. The babe was too young to feel afraid, and it cuddled close to the old bear, and felt that it had found a friend. After a while it fell asleep, but the bear guarded it until morning, and then went down the mountainside to look for food. In the evening the bear came again and carried the child to her own den under the shelter of a rock where vines and wildflowers grew, and every day after that she came and gave the child food and played with it. Soon all the bears on the mountain learned about the wonderful cub and came to see it, and not one of them tried to harm it. The little girl grew quickly and became strong. After a while she could walk and run among the trees and rocks and brambles on the round top of the mountain, but her bear mother would not allow her to wander far from the den beneath the rock where the vines and the wildflowers grew. One day some hunters came up the mountain looking for game, meaning looking for animals that they could eat. One of them pulled aside the vines that grew in front of the old bear's home. He was surprised to see the beautiful child lying on the grass and playing with the flowers she had gathered. But at sight of him she leaped to her feet and bounded away like a frightened deer. She led the hunters on a fine chase among the trees and rocks, and there were a dozen of them, being a dozen of the hunters, and by circling her they managed at last to catch her. The child struggled and fought as hard as she knew how, but it was no use. The hunters carried her down the mountain and took her to the house where they lived on the other side of the forest. At first she cried all the time, for she sadly missed the bear that had been a mother to her for so long. But the hunters were very kind and treated her like their daughter, and so, slowly, she also came to like her new home. The hunters named the girl Atalanta. When she grew older, they made her a bow and arrows and taught her how to shoot, and they gave her a light spear and showed her how to carry it and how to hurl it at game or at an enemy. They took her with them when they went hunting, and there was nothing in the world that pleased her so much as roaming through the woods and running after the deer and other wild animals. Her feet became very swift, so that she could run faster than any of the men. Her arms were her arms were so strong and her eyes so sharp that with her arrow or her spear, she never missed the mark. And she grew up to be very tall and graceful, and was known throughout all of Arcadia as Atalanta, the fleet-footed huntress. All right, so you know that I could talk about this forever, but I'm gonna keep it short. I'm just going to say that the first time that this story uses the pronoun she, even though we know that the baby is a girl the whole time, the first time that the story stops saying it and actually says she is after the bear brings her in as her own child. So right here, the little girl grew quickly and became strong. After a while, she could walk and run. That's the first time that the story says she. All the time before that, it said it. So I'm not going to talk now about why that might be important. What does that mean? But I'm sure we'll talk about it in class. All right, let's go into part 2. Okay, so the wild bear of Caldon. Let's look and see bear. The wild boar. Let's go look at what a boar is, first of all. So, let's see here. Okay, yeah. So a boar is like a very big pig, but meaner and stronger and scarier. I mean, like, regular pigs aren't scary, but boars are. So they are, like I said, a cousin of the pig. They have these like tusks that kind of come out. They are very strong, like super, super strong. They can run into something and push it down. A few years ago, I actually watched what was that show called? It was something about like all the different predators in the world, and it was saying that like a wild boar could, if it had like 10 feet of like starting space, if it could at least run 10 feet before it hit your front door, it could run and literally run through your front door because it's just that strong. Something like that. I just remember like listening to that show and being like really scared and being glad that like boars don't live where I live. But anyway, they're very strong. They run around and run into things, and this is what they look like. So now let's go back to, okay, the wild boar of Caldon. So now that you kind of have like an idea of what we're talking about, it'll make it a little bit easier to understand the story. So here we go. Not very far from the land of Arcadia, there is a little city called Caldon. You could probably pronounce this 3 different ways, but I'm just going to say Caldon. It lay in the midst of rich wheat fields and fruitful vineyards, but beyond the vineyards was a deep, dense forest where many wild beasts lived. One day, the largest and fiercest wild boar that anybody had ever seen came rushing out of the forest. It had 2 long tusks which stuck far out of its mouth on either side and were sharp as knives, and the stiff bristles on its back were as long as knitting needles. That was a mouthful. The wild boar raced toward Caldon, champing its teeth and foaming at the mouth. It rushed into the wheat fields and tore up all the grain. It charged into the vineyard and broke down all the vines. It rooted up all the trees in the orchard, and when there was nothing else to do, it hurtled into the pastures among the hills and killed the sheep that were feeding there. Just tearing up everything. The beast was so fierce and so swift that everyone fled before it. Its thick skin was proof against arrows and against such spears as the people of Caldon had, and many brave warriors who tried to attack the boar died at the edge of its terrible razor tusks. So, 1 second. When it says its thick skin was proof against arrows, that means that like the arrows didn't even penetrate through it. The thick skin was like impenetrable against the arrows. Hopefully that makes sense. Basically, like the weapons that the people tried to use, it was no use because it didn't work for the boar. Where are we? Oh, right here. For weeks it ran wild about the countryside, and the only safe place for anybody was inside the city walls. At last, when it had laid waste to much of the country, the boar went back into the edge of the forest. But the people were so much afraid of it that they lived in constant dread that the beast should come again and tear down the gates of the city. So why did the boar do the thing that it did? Nobody's got a reason. It just ran around destroying stuff, and when there's nothing else left to destroy, it went back into the forest. Very weird, but so the story goes. So let's keep reading. So the king of Chaldan sent messengers into all the countries nearby, asking the bravest men and the most skillful hunters to come at a certain time and help him hunt and kill the great wild boar. When the day came, there was a wonderful gathering of men at Chaldan. The greatest heroes in the world were there. Everyone was fully armed and all expected to have fine sport hunting the terrible beast. With the warriors from the south came at Atalanta, armed with bow and arrows and a long hunting spear. So the king of Chaldan, his people are super scared about this beast. So he says, hey, everybody, he's putting up posters, sending out the messengers. Hey, anybody come help us kill this beast. You're going to be famous if you come help us, because people, just like Theseus, they want to prove that they're heroes. They want to prove that they're these great adventurers and hunters. So they're looking for opportunities like this where, if they're the one that kills the boar, people will be talking about them for, ever. They don't have any Facebook or TikTok or Instagram, so they've got to be, popular another way. So this is their way to do it. So with everybody that's showing up to kill the boar, Atalanta also comes. So where are we now? You guys know I start talking. Right here. My daughters are having a game of ball in the garden, said the king to the huntress. Would you like to put away your arrows and your spear and go play with them? Atalanta shook her head and lifted her chin in disdain. Perhaps you would rather stay with the queen and look at the women spin and weave, said the king. No, answered Atalanta. I am going with the warriors to hunt the wild boar in the forest. The men gasped. They had never heard of such a thing as a girl going out with heroes to hunt wild boars. If she goes, then I will not, muttered one. Nor will I, said another, and a little more loudly. Why, the whole wide world would laugh at us, and we should never hear the end of it. Nor will I, exclaimed a third one. The hunt is for heroes, not for girls. Many of the men guffawed and hooted at the young huntress, but Atalanta only grasped her spear more firmly and stood tall and straight in the gateway of the palace. Just then, the youngest prince of Chaldan came forward. His name was Meleager, and we like Meleager, but before we get to him, let's look at this. I think this is interesting. This sentence right here, they say, the hunt is for heroes, not for girls. So notice they didn't say the hunt is for men, not for girls. The hunt is for boys or males, not for girls. They didn't say a gender versus a gender. They said heroes and not girls. So are girls not able to be heroes? Let's keep going. So Meleager, he's the youngest prince of Chaldan, and he stands up to say something, and we like Meleager. Let's see what he says. What's this? He cried. Who says that Atalanta shall not go to the hunt? Why, I believe you are afraid that she'll be braver than you. Fine heroes you are. Let all such cowards go home at once. All laughter died away in a moment, and not a single man moved. And it was settled then and there that Atalanta would go with the heroes to hunt the wild boar, though some of the men kept muttering and complaining among themselves. For 9 days the heroes and huntsmen feasted in the halls of the king of Chaldan. Early on the 10th they set out for the forest. Soon they came upon the great beast, which came charging out upon his foes. The heroes hid behind the trees or climbed up among the branches, for they had not expected to see so terrible a creature. The boar stood in the middle of a glade, pawing the ground with his hooves and tearing it up with his tusks. White foam rolled from his mouth, and his eyes glistened like red fire, and he grunted so fiercely that the woods and hills echoed with fearful sounds. One of the bravest of the men threw his spear, but that only made the beast fiercer than ever. He charged the warrior, caught him up before he could scramble into a tree, and tore him to pieces in a mad fury. Another man leapt out from his hiding place and was also killed. Then one of the oldest and noblest of the heroes launched his spear with a mighty heave, but it only grazed the boar's tough skin and glanced away. The boar was getting the best of the fight. Softly, Atalanta stepped out into the glade. She leveled her spear and threw it with all her might. The boar squealed as the sharp point pierced its skin. It ran about in a frenzy. So everybody else has been trying to throw their weapons at this boar, and it's not working. Well, one, because when you're scared, you're not always thinking straight, right? And two, because they're just kind of like, eh. They're just like throwing it like, ah, and then running. Whereas Atalanta is facing this beast, and she's like, you know what? I'm going to get close to it. She's like pitter-pattering into the glade, waiting for the right moment. She throws the spear. It actually hits. So let's see what happens after. The beast is not dead, but he has been hurt. Don't remember what sentence we were on. 1 second. It ran about in a frenzy, heedless of the hunters and their arrows and spears. Then Meleager rushed up and thrust his spear into its heart. The terrible creature thrashed and then rolled over, dead. The heroes then cut off the boar's skin and offered it to Meleager as a prize, because he had given the boar its death wound. But Meleager said, it belongs to Atalanta, because it was she who wounded the boar first, and he gave the skin to her as the prize of honor. Excuse me. So, with the beast being hurt, like this entire time, the beast is confident, rawr, rawr, chomp, chomp, like, I'm the beast, whatever. But once it's been hurt, now it's like, whoa, what is this? I'm not used to this life. What do you, ouch. And so because it's not on its A game anymore, that's how Meleager was able to get to it and kill it. But usually, they would give that prize to the person who made that lasting blow. But Meleager notices that, I never would have been able to make this death blow if it hadn't first been for Atalanta. So she deserves this. Everybody was willing to give that compliment and that praise to him, but he pushed it over to Atalanta and said, no, she deserves it. So this is, part 3. This is part 3, Atalanta's race. So let's get into this. After the hunt at Caldon, Atalanta went back to her old home among the mountains of Arcadia. She was still the fleet-footed huntress, and she was never so happy as when in the green woods, wandering among the trees or chasing the wild deer. All of the world had heard about her, however, and the young heroes in the land nearest to Arcadia did nothing else but talk about her beauty, grace, swiftness, and courage. So they are just fawning over this girl, Again, these men, these young heroes, they want those status symbols. So, like I said earlier, they want to be known as a hero who saved such and such from so-and-so. But another way that they can gain status is by being connected to these other people who also have status. So they want to be connected to Atalanta because it might make them look better. Okay, so let's look at this. What are they going to do? Of course, every one of these young fellows wanted her to become his wife, and she might have been a queen any day if she had only said the word, for the richest king in Greece would have been glad to marry her. But she cared nothing for any of the young men. She preferred the freedom of the green woods to all the luxury she might have enjoyed in a palace. But the young men would not take no for an answer. They could not believe that she really meant it, so they kept coming and staying until the woods of Arcadia were full of them, and there was no getting along with them at all. So when she could think of no other way to get rid of them, Atalanta called them together and said, "You want to marry me, do you? Well, if any one of you would like to run a race with me from this mountain to the riverbank, he may do so. I will be the wife of the one who outruns me." So remember, she's fleet-footed. So she's quick. She's quicker than any man. That's what we saw in part 1. So if you want to marry me, that's fine. Let's have a race. And if you outrun me, I'll marry you. That's what she says. Agreed, agreed, cried all the young fellows. But listen, she said. Whoever tries this race must also agree that if I outrun him, he will lose his life. The men glanced furtively at one another. Many of them drew away from the crowd, melted into the trees, and turned their hurried footsteps toward home. Those who stayed said, "We agree, but if we are to risk our lives, won't you at least give us a head start?" "As you wish," she answered. "I will give you a start of 100 paces. But remember, if I overtake anyone before he reaches the river, he shall lose his life that very day." So she wants to make it very serious. I'm not playing with y'all. That's basically what she said. I'm not playing with y'all. I don't want to be bothered. Leave me alone. And since you won't leave me alone, guess what? I will let you have this race, but if you lose, you're going to lose your life. She wants people to turn away and leave her alone and get out of the forest. She's not expecting for many people to take her up on this offer, and then the people who do, she'll get rid of them one way or another because she plans on outrunning them. Okay, so remember, this is just so she can get people to leave her alone. She doesn't care to be married. She doesn't care to be a queen. She just wants to run around in the forest and live her life. So let's see what happens. Several others now decided that they were not feeling well, or that business called them home, so they also left the crowd. But a few who had some practice sprinting across the country stayed and made up their minds to try their luck. Could a mere girl outrun such fine fellows as they? Nonsense. So they're very prideful, and they are undermining her... What's the word I'm looking for? They're undermining her reputation, and they just don't believe that she could possibly be any better than they are just because they're men and just because she's a woman. So they're like, yeah, we'll be fine. We'll be fine. And so it happened, I'm right here. And so it happened that a race was run almost every day. And almost every day some poor fellow lost his life, for the swiftest sprinter in all of Greece was overtaken by Atalanta long before he could reach the riverbank. Then one day, so people are trying, and they're also dying, right? No one has outran her yet. Then one day there came from a distant land a fine young man named Hippomenes. Atalanta liked his kind expression and his courteous manner. Courteous. It's actually underlined, so let's go to the bottom. Courteous, polite, and considerate. He's not looking at her as just some girl. He's being polite and considerate, which is very unrelatable for most of the men in the story. She dearly hoped that this young man would not put himself to the test in a race against her. She doesn't want him to die. "You had better not run with me," said Atalanta, "for I am sure to overtake you, and you will lose your life." "Ah, my good lady, that remains to be seen," replied Hippomenes, with a curious twinkle in his eye. For before he had come to try his chance, Hippomenes had sought the help of Aphrodite, the queen of love, who lived among the clouds on Mount Olympus. And Hippomenes was so gentle and wise and brave that Aphrodite took pity on him. She gave him 3 golden apples and told him how he might use them to defeat the fleet-footed Huntress in a race. So, okay, before he met Atalanta, of course he's heard of her, right? And before he goes to Arcadia and to meet her and to run against her, he first makes a pit stop at Mount Olympus and meets Queen Aphrodite, and she gives him 3 golden apples that he's now going to use in this race to win. Okay, so we'll see how that happens. On the day of the race, I'm right here. On the day of the race, Atalanta tried again to persuade Hippomenes not to run, for she also took pity on him. "I'm sure to overtake you," she said. "Please, don't lose your life needlessly." "I won't," laughed Hippomenes, and away he sped. But in his pocket he carried Aphrodite's 3 golden apples. Atalanta gave him a good start, and then she followed after, as swift as an arrow shot from the bow. Hippomenes was not a very fast runner, and it would not be hard for her to overtake him. She thought that she would let him get almost to the goal, for she really pitied him. But then he heard her quick breath behind him. He threw one of the golden apples over his shoulder. As the apple fell to the ground, Atalanta saw how beautiful it was, and she stopped to pick it up. While she was doing this, Hippomenes gained a good many paces, but in a minute she was as close behind him as ever. And yet she really did pity him. Just then Hippomenes threw the second apple over his shoulder. It was handsomer and larger than the first, and Atalanta could not bear the thought of allowing someone else to get it, so she stopped to pick it up from where it had fallen among the long grass. It took longer to find than she had expected, and when she looked up again, Hippomenes was 100 feet ahead of her. But that was no matter. She could easily overtake him. And yet, how she did pity the foolish young man. Hippomenes heard her footsteps thundering just a few paces behind him. He took the third apple and threw it over to one side of the path, where the ground sloped toward the river. Atalanta's quick eye saw that it was far more beautiful than either of the others. If it were not picked up at once, it would roll down into the deep water and be lost, and that would never do. She turned aside from her course and ran after it. It was easy enough to retrieve the apple, but while she was doing so, Hippomenes gained upon her again. He was almost at the river bank. How she strained every muscle now to overtake him! But after all, she felt that she did not care very much. He was the finest young man that she had ever seen, and he had given her 3 golden apples, and he had risked his life to win her. It would be a great pity if he should have to die. So she slowed her steps and let him reach the river bank first. After that, Atalanta became Hippomenes' wife, and the young man